The blue gift bag was still in her hand when Amara Caldwell heard her husband's voice coming from behind a hospital room door. Not a voice she imagined, not a voice she misread. His voice low, certain, unmistakable, saying things a man only says when he believes no one who matters is listening. She had driven 40 minutes through Chicago rain to bring her sister's newborn, a blanket stitched with his name. She had paid for the hospital room. She had paid for the prenatal appointments, the maternity clothes, the emergency visit in February, when Naomi called crying at 2 in the morning. She had done all of it because that is what Amara did. She held things together while everyone else came apart. She stopped outside room 114 because the voice stopped her feet before her mind caught up. Then she looked through the narrow glass window, and the next 60 seconds rearranged everything she thought she knew about the last 11 years of her life. If that had been you standing in that hallway, gift in hand, love in good faith, what would you have done? Before we go any further like this one, speak to something real in you. Please subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. These stories travel farther than we ever expect, and every single location you share reminds us that human experience betrayal, survival, the long walk back to yourself crosses every border. Now stay with us, because what Amara does next is not what anyone predicted. The rain had been falling since 4 in the afternoon, and by the time Amara pulled into the hospital parking structure, the city had gone the gray-brown color it turned in November, when the sky couldn't decide between winter and something worse. She was not a woman who ran late. That was a fact about her, the same way her shoe size was a fact unchangeable, unremarkable to her, mildly impressive to people who worked alongside her. Amara Caldwell arrived early to everything. Board meetings, dental appointments, the yearly performance reviews she used to dread and had since learned to turn into negotiations. 35 years old and already a financial compliance director at a mid-sized healthcare management firm, she had built her professional life with the same precision she applied to every other corner of her existence. The blue gift bag bumped softly against her knee as she walked toward the elevator. Inside, a hand-stitched blanket, cream-colored with pale blue lettering. She had ordered it 3 weeks ago, before the baby had a name, and when Naomi finally settled on Eli, Amara had paid the embroidery shop rush fees to have it redone properly. That was the kind of sister she was. She punched the button for the 3rd floor and thought about what she would say when she saw him, this small person who had already, without doing anything, changed the shape of her family. She was not sentimental by nature, but she had been looking forward to this. Walking into that room, handing over the bag, watching her younger sister hold something they'd made together, not the baby, but the effort of getting here. The months of quiet, consistent help that Amara had given without keeping score. Or so she had told herself. The elevator opened. She followed the overhead signs toward the maternity ward. A nurse passed her pushing an empty wheelchair. Somewhere ahead, a baby cried the raw, airless cry of the newly arrived. Room 114 was at the end of the corridor. She was maybe 15 feet away when she heard him. Min-jae's voice was not loud, it never was. Kang Min-jae, 41 years old, had built an empire luxury construction firms, import operations. Commercial properties spread across the north side and the suburbs on the understanding that men who truly hold power do not need to raise their voices. He spoke quietly, and people moved. He spoke quietly, and rooms reorganized themselves around his preferences. Amara had spent 11 years married to that quiet, and she knew it the way you know, a sound that's been part of your house since the beginning without thinking, without examining, just as background. But it was not background now. She stopped walking. Through the narrow vertical cult window set into the door of room 114, she could see most up to the room. The hospital bed, the monitors, the bassist positioned near the window. Her sister Naomi sitting upright, her hair pulled back, looking the way she always looked after. She'd been crying raw around the eyes, softer somehow, like something had been temporarily stripped away. And Min-jae, standing beside the bed, leaning slightly forward, his hand resting on Naomi's shoulder in the way a man rests his hand on a shoulder when the shoulder is familiar territory. He kissed her forehead, not the kiss of a concerned relative checking on a family friend. Something slower, something that had history in it. Amara did not move. She could hear him clearly. The door was not fully latched. She would think about that detail many times in the months that followed the fact that if someone had simply pulled the door all the way shut, her entire life might have continued on its existing trajectory, a long and expensive mistake she never detected. But the door was not fully latched. "He looks like you," Min-jae said. Naomi looked at the bassinet. "You think the jaw?" A pause. "He'll be stubborn." Naomi laughed, the short, slightly breathless laugh of someone operating on no sleep and high emotion. "Wonder where he gets that." Then Min-jae straightened. His voice dropped even further, the way it did when he shifted from conversation to the kind of statement he expected to be received without argument. "The boy carries my name. That's already decided." Naomi nodded, and by the time the house is ready, he stopped. "Adjusted something. She'll keep paying. She won't ask questions as long as you keep the story straight." Silence. Amara stood in the corridor with a gift bag in her hand and a blanket stitched with her nephew's name, and 11 years of marriage dissolving in real time through a gap in a hospital door. She. There was only one she in that conversation. Only one woman who had been paying without asking questions. Only one person whose money had been quietly, systematically factored into someone else's future. The gift bag nearly left her hand. She caught it. She stood there for another 4 seconds. She counted them later, or thought she did, and then she did the thing that would come to define what kind of woman she actually was, as opposed to the woman both of them had apparently assumed she was. She did not go in. She reached into her bag, found her phone, and noted the time, 6:47 p.m. She noted the room number. She wrote down, as precisely as she could reconstruct them, the exact words she had heard. Then she walked back down the corridor the way she had come. Past the empty wheelchair, past the nurse's station, back into the elevator. She pressed the button for the parking structure. She did not cry in the elevator. She did not cry walking to her car. She sat in the driver's seat in the gray concrete dark of level 2 and set the gift bag carefully on the passenger seat and stared at the windshield while the rain tapped the roof. Then the shock broke through. It came in waves rather than all at once. First the recognition, then the arithmetic, then the specific and terrible understanding of what she had been to both of them. Not a sister, not a wife, a funding source, a woman whose reliability had been leveraged like a financial instrument. She sat with it for 6 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock. Then she picked up her phone and called her lender. It was 6:53 on a Thursday evening. She had the personal cell number of her lending officer because Amara Caldwell was exactly the kind of client lending officers gave personal cell numbers to. She made the call, she explained calmly. Precisely that she needed to halt the application process on the home equity loan she had initiated. $35,000. Gone from their plan before Min-jae left the hospital. She drove home in the rain and did not say a word to anyone. That night, she lay in the bed she shared with her husband and stared at the ceiling and ran numbers. Not the kind of numbers she ran at work, not compliance audits or payroll reconciliations. Personal numbers, rent she had covered, medical bills. The nursery furniture that Naomi had texted her a photo of with 3 heart emojis. The February emergency. The cab fare she'd sent through an app at midnight because Naomi had said she was stranded. By 2 in the morning, she had a rough figure. It was not small. She did not sleep. Min-jae came home at 11:30 and moved quietly through the house the way he always did when he came home late, which was often, and which Amara had long since accepted as the nature of running a legitimate business operation that also concealed, beneath its polished surface, a criminal organization that kept the city's more dangerous people in respectful order. She had known what he was before she married. Him she had chosen it with open eyes, or thought she had, because the man she'd chosen had been, she believed, honest with her in the ways that mattered. She heard him in the hallway. She closed her eyes and breathed steadily and did not move. He came to bed. She felt the mattress shift. Within minutes his breathing was even. She thought, He believes I am asleep. She thought, he has believed many things about me that are not accurate. The next 3 weeks were among the most disciplined of Amara's life, and discipline was not a concept she lacked experience with. She redirected her direct deposit to an individual account she opened during a lunch break. She gathered every financial document she had legal access to. She froze her personal credit so no new joint obligations could be opened without her knowledge. She made an appointment with a divorce attorney whose name she had once heard mentioned at a professional conference, Celeste Rowan, known in certain circles for the kind of work that did not make headlines but reliably produced outcomes. She told no one. Not her mother, not her colleagues, not her oldest friend Deja, who would have immediately driven over with wine and righteous fury, and who would have through no malicious intent complicated everything. Amara needed clarity before she needed comfort. She began with what she knew. Min-jae had been with Naomi for some portion of time. The baby, Eli, was his. He had made a statement about a house, about ongoing payments, about a story being kept straight. She built outward from there. Celeste Rowan's paralegal helped her obtain financial discovery documentation that Amara, as a financial compliance director, was better equipped to read than most divorcing spouses. She began going through it on evenings when Min-jae was out, which was, she now recognized, quite often. She found restaurant charges, hotel stays, a recurring vendor called NC Atelier listed as a design consultancy in Min-jae's construction division. She pulled the business registration. NC Atelier belonged to Naomi Caldwell. Amara sat at the kitchen table with the document on her laptop screen and felt something shift inside her chest, not collapse, not shatter. Settle. The way a diagnosis settles after you've been carrying symptoms without a name. This was not a moment of weakness. This was not a man who had stumbled into something. Min-jae had been paying her sister through a shell consultancy, while Amara unknowingly helped organize portions of his legitimate financial records, removing anomalies she thought were administrative errors, creating clean documentation around transactions designed to conceal the relationship. She had been cleaning up evidence of her own betrayal. She sat with that for a long time. Then she opened a new spreadsheet and began building a separate column. When the canceled loan reached Min-jae through whatever channel, through whatever version of events Naomi gave him, he came home one afternoon to find Amara at the kitchen table with her laptop and a glass of water, and he asked her, in that quiet, controlled voice, what had happened to the home equity application. She looked up at him. I canceled it. He waited. He was accustomed to waiting people out, to letting silence do the work that pressure sometimes couldn't. It was one of the things she had once found steadying about him, the lack of panic, the long view. Now she understood the long view had a different destination than she'd believed. Why, he said. I changed my mind. He studied her face for a moment, looking for the crack, looking for the tell that would let him calculate his next move. She gave him nothing. Amara, Min-jae. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, and for a moment they were just two people at a kitchen table, which was almost enough to make it hurt in a different way. The baby, she said, Naomi's baby. Tell me about him. Something moved behind his eyes, just for a second. What do you want to know? Who the father is. The silence that followed lasted long enough that she understood. He had already decided she knew that some version of this conversation had been anticipated, prepared for, positioned. He was not a man who walked into rooms unprepared. His name is Eli, Min-jae said. I know his name. I paid for the room where he was born. Min-jae set his hands flat on the table. I was going to tell you. How long? He didn't answer immediately. How long, Min-jae? Close to a year, she nodded. One single nod, the way you acknowledge a number, when the number is what you already estimated, but needed confirmed. And the house. He was quiet. The townhouse, she said. The one I was going to help Naomi buy with money I borrowed against this house. Was that your plan? Or hers? Or both of yours together? He stopped, restarted. It was practical. You were already helping, we thought. She let the words sit there between them like something physical. It wasn't about hurting you. I understand exactly what it was about. She closed her laptop. You don't need to explain the mechanics to me. I work in financial compliance. I understand how money gets moved when people don't want to account for where it went. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time in 11 years, she saw something in his face she had not seen before. Not remorse, not quite, something closer to recalibration. He had believed she would react differently. She could see it in the way he was adjusting, the way a man adjusts when the room is not configured the way he expected it to be. Naomi loves you, he said. I know she does. Amara stood up. She also counted every dollar I made and built a future around the assumption that I would keep providing them. That's not love. That's infrastructure. She picked up her laptop and walked out of the kitchen. 2 days later, she spoke to Naomi. Not because she was ready, because being ready was a luxury she had decided she could not afford. Naomi cried. She apologized in the fragmentary way people apologize when they are simultaneously sorry and still, underneath the sorry, unconvinced they had a real alternative. She said Amara didn't understand what it was like to need someone the way she had needed Min-jae. She said the feelings had simply happened. Amara let her talk. Then she asked one question. When were you going to tell me? Naomi wiped her face, looked at her hands. After the house was signed. After I signed the loan. Min-jae thought we thought that once everything was settled, once Eli was home, it would be easier to understand why. Easier. Amara repeated the word without inflection. You would have had time to adjust. To adjust to what, Naomi? To the fact that you were going to take $35,000 from me and use it to move my husband into a house I financed, and then expect me to continue adjusting? Continue paying? Naomi was quiet. Mom would have helped you see it differently, she finally said. And Eli, you wouldn't have wanted to hurt Eli. There it was. The baby as leverage, the mother as pressure, the whole architecture of it revealed in one guileless sentence. They had not just betrayed her. They had mapped out, in advance, every relationship she valued and calculated how to deploy each one to keep her from responding the way any self-respecting person would respond. They had built their future on a blueprint of her character, her loyalty, her sense of responsibility, her love for her family, and they had been so confident in the blueprint that they had never seriously entertained the possibility she might refuse to follow it. Amara looked at her sister. I filed for divorce this morning, she said. Naomi's face went still. Celeste Rowan is representing me. If you have any financial questions about what happens next, you can direct them to her office. Stood. The blanket I brought to the hospital, Eli keeps that. It was always his. She left. On the drive back, the rain started again. Chicago in November. The city had a way of matching its weather to the weight of things. She turned on the radio. Some song she didn't know. She let it play. Somewhere behind her, in a hospital room, that had already become a different kind of memory, a man who controlled an empire had made one significant miscalculation. He had assumed that Amara's capacity to absorb difficulty was the same thing as her willingness to accept it. They were not the same thing. They had never been the same thing. And now every number in every account they shared was going to prove it. The divorce papers were filed on a Wednesday, and by Friday, Min-jae knew. Amara understood he would find out quickly. She had not filed expecting secrecy. She had filed expecting exactly what followed. The phone call that came at 8:14 in the morning while she was sitting at her desk reviewing a payroll discrepancy flagged by one of her junior analysts. She watched his name appear on her screen. She let it ring. Then she forwarded the call to voicemail, set the phone face down on her desk, and returned to the discrepancy. The number was off by 340. Someone had transposed 2 digits in a benefits deduction code. Small error. The kind of thing that compounded if left alone. She corrected it and moved on. Min-jae called 3 more times before noon. She did not answer any of them. At 12:47, a text arrived. We need to talk. Face to face. Tonight. She typed back one sentence. Contact Celeste Rowan's office. Then she blocked his number on her personal phone and forwarded his future contact attempts to her attorney's paralegal, whose name was Marcus, and who had the flat, unbothered affect of a man who had absorbed thousands of hours of marital collapse without taking any of it personally. That evening, she came home to find Min-jae's car in the driveway. She sat in her own car for a moment. The engine ticked. Streetlights were coming on, one by one down the block. She thought about turning around, driving to a hotel, letting him have the house for the night, just to avoid whatever was about to happen. Then she thought about the 35,000, the NC Atelier invoices, the nursery furniture cataloged under renovations materials, the 11 years of evenings spent cleaning up the edges of his legitimate financial records while he used the clean edges to hide something else entirely. She got out of the car. He was in the kitchen. Standing near the island, his coat still on, his hands loose at his sides, the posture of a man who had decided not to look threatening, but couldn't quite commit to looking harmless either. There was a glass of water on the counter that she didn't think he'd touched. "You blocked my number," he said. "I directed your contact to my attorney's office." "That's not blocking. That's procedure. You filed without telling me." "I wasn't required to tell you in advance." She set her bag on the chair by the door. Kept her coat on. Not a conscious decision, her body simply didn't trust the room enough to settle into it. "If you have concerns about the timeline, Marcus can walk you through the process." "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Talking to me like I'm a compliance issue." She looked at him across the kitchen. "You hid a year-long relationship with my sister inside your corporate accounts. You funneled money to her through a shell consultancy while I organized the records that surrounded it. You planned to leave this marriage directly into a house my money helped buy." She paused. "If it looks like a compliance issue, Min-jae, that's because you structured it like one." Something moved across his face. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was the expression of a man who had anticipated several versions of this conversation and was discovering that none of them had been accurate enough. "I didn't want it to happen this way," he said. "Which part?" "Any of it. But it did happen. For almost a year it happened, and neither of you told me." Naomi wanted to. "Don't." The word came out sharp and flat, and she surprised herself slightly with how little effort it took to stop him. "Don't tell me what Naomi wanted." "I spoke to Naomi. I know exactly what Naomi wanted." She picked up her bag again. "I'm going to stay in the guest room until we agree on a separation arrangement. Please don't come in without knocking." She was at the hallway entrance when he said her name. "Amara." She stopped, didn't turn. "I am sorry." And the thing was the thing that made it complicated, that she would think about at 4 in the morning. In the weeks that followed, he sounded like he meant it. Not completely, not cleanly, but somewhere in the register of the word, there was something that hadn't been rehearsed. She stood in the doorway and breathed once. "Being sorry doesn't restructure what you built," she said. "Talk to Marcus." She went down the hallway and closed the guest room door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed in her coat and stared at the floor and let herself feel, for exactly 7 minutes, the full weight of how tired she was. Then she opened her laptop and got back to work. The first person who called her not to negotiate, not to apply pressure, just to ask how she was doing, was her colleague Priya, who had worked in the cubicle next to Amara's for 3 years and had a talent for detecting emotional weather systems that Amara had always found mildly unsettling and was now intensely grateful for. Priya knocked on her office door on Monday morning, leaned against the frame, and said, "You look like someone who hasn't slept in a week and is very aggressively pretending otherwise." Amara looked up from her screen. "I've slept. In a real bed or at your desk?" "Priya, I'm asking as a colleague who is also, peripherally, your friend, and who has noticed that you've been here before 7, every morning for the past 9 days." Amara considered her screen for a moment. "I filed for divorce." Priya was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Okay. I'm fine. You don't have to be fine. I know that." Amara straightened the folder on her desk that didn't need straightening. "But I have a project assessment on Thursday, and I need to be functional, so fine is what I'm working with." Priya came in, closed the door behind her, and sat down in the chair across the desk. "Is there anything you need that isn't work-related?" "No." "Are you eating, Priya?" "I'll take that as a sometimes." She stood up. "There's leftover dal in the break room refrigerator. Second shelf. It has my name on it, but you can have it." She left without making it into a moment, which was exactly what Amara needed. Project assessment Amara had mentioned was not incidental. For 2 years, she had watched the leadership of a major financial compliance conversion at her firm cycle through 3 different managers without producing a coherent implementation plan. The conversion affected payroll systems for over 400 healthcare employees across 6 sites. The current approach had gaps that anyone with her background could identify in an afternoon. She had held back from competing for the lead role because evenings at home had always found some way to pull her away, a problem in Min-jae's import company records, a question about a property transaction that he'd frame as quick, that would take 3 hours. She had accepted this as the normal texture of being married to a complicated man. She understood now what she had been accepting. On Thursday, she sat the leadership assessment. She failed it, not catastrophically, not in a way that invited public comment. But the score came back 2 points below the threshold, and her supervisor, a measured woman named Dr. Patricia Cole, called her in to discuss it in the toneless but not unkind way. She delivered all professional feedback. The technical components were strong, Dr. Cole said. Implementation sequencing showed a gap. You moved too fast on the reconciliation phase. Amara nodded. She knew. She had seen the error the moment she submitted and had spent the following hour in a bathroom stall, working through exactly where her reasoning had collapsed. Is there anything affecting your focus right now, Doctor? Cole asked. I'm managing some personal matters. It won't be a factor. The reassessment window is 3 weeks. I'll be ready in 2. Dr. Cole studied her for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether to say one more thing. She apparently decided not to. All right, let me know if you need anything. Amara went back to her desk and opened her notes from the assessment and began rebuilding from the reconciliation phase forward. She studied the way she had once studied for the professional certification exams that had gotten her this job in the first place, methodically, without sentiment, treating her own previous reasoning as a document to be audited rather than a position to be defended. She worked late. She worked early. She ran the sequencing scenarios until they stopped feeling like scenarios and started feeling like instinct. She did not hear from Min-jae again directly. His attorney, a man named Hartwell, whose reputation in Chicago legal circles suggested he was very good at prolonging things, sent a letter through Celeste's office requesting a meeting to discuss the marital asset division. Celeste called Amara to walk her through the letter. He's going to push for a standard split, Celeste said. His team will argue the business assets are separate because they predate the marriage, or argue the valuations are lower than they are. We have a different view because of the forensic findings. Because of the forensic findings, the NC Atelier payments alone represent a significant marital asset diversion. Question is whether we go for the full accounting or use it as leverage to reach a faster settlement. What do you recommend? I recommend we get the full accounting first. Then we have the leverage. Amara considered the window behind Celeste's desk, the Chicago skyline in the gray late morning light. Do it. It's going to make things uncomfortable for him. Good, Amara said, not bitterly. Not with heat, just factually. Do it. Min-jae moved out of the house 2 weeks after the filing. He did not make a scene. He came on a Saturday when Amara was at the office. She had arranged it that way through the attorneys and removed his personal belongings with the help of 2 men she didn't recognize. Came home that evening to find the closets half empty and the cabinet in the home office cleared of the personal documents he kept there. She stood in the doorway of the home office for a while. There was a faint rectangular outline on the shelf where a framed photograph had been for the entire duration of their marriage. Her and Min-jae at a rooftop in Seoul, 3 years in, when she had believed without question that the architecture of her life was sound. She didn't miss the photograph. She missed the version of herself who had stood in that rooftop wind, not yet knowing what she was building toward. She went to the kitchen, made coffee, and called Celeste to confirm the moving out had been completed without incident. His team will request the house valuation next, Celeste said. I know. Are you all right? I'll be all right when this is finished. Fair enough. She drank her coffee and reviewed the forensic accounting update Marcus had forwarded earlier in the day. The independent forensic accountant, a small, precise woman named Dr. Ruth Okafor, who had been recommended by Celeste and who seemed to approach financial irregularities with the same focused pleasure a surgeon might bring to a particularly interesting procedure, had flagged 3 additional categories of concern beyond the NC Atelier payments. Personal expenses run through corporate accounts, hotel stays, restaurant bills, 2 separate weekend charges at a lakeside property in Wisconsin that appeared as contractor site visits in the construction company records, a miscategorized equipment purchase that turned out to be nursery furniture, and a recurring quarterly transfer to a holding company that, when traced 2 layers deep, resolved into an account Naomi Caldwell had opened 8 months ago. 8 months. Amara read the date twice. Eli was roughly 10 days old when she'd stood outside room 114. The pregnancy had been approximately 9 months, which meant Naomi had opened the holding account roughly 1 month into the pregnancy, possibly before she had told Amara the baby's father had abandoned her. Possibly the same week she had called Amara crying and asked for rent money. Amara sat with the document in front of her and breathed carefully through her nose. She was not going to call Naomi right now. She was not going to call anyone. Sips. She was going to add this information to the column she'd been building, cross-reference it against the timeline she'd reconstructed, and hand it to Celeste in the morning. That was what she was going to do. She set the document aside and opened her assessment prep notes and worked until midnight. Her mother called on a Tuesday. Loretta Caldwell was 62 and had a way of leading into difficult conversations at an angle, circling the actual subject for several minutes before arriving at it, which Amara had always found simultaneously endearing and exhausting, and which tonight landed somewhere closer to exhausting. Loretta talked about the weather, about the church bake sale that Amara did not attend, about a neighbor whose son had gotten a new job, and then gently but without real hesitation, "I went to see Naomi and the baby this weekend." "Okay," Amara said. "Eli is beautiful, baby. He's so—" Loretta paused. "He looks healthy. He looks good. I'm glad." Naomi's struggling. Amara waited. "She's not. Min-jae is helping with some things, but it's not—" Loretta stopped again. Took a different approach. "I just think, the baby didn't do anything." "Eli didn't do anything." "I agree," Amara said. "Eli didn't do anything. So maybe— Mom. I'm just saying if there was some way to—" Mom, not sharp, not unkind, but firm enough to stop the sentence. "I love you. I love Eli. I have not done anything to harm Eli, and I don't intend to. What I will not do is continue sending money to Naomi and Min-jae to fund a life they chose over the one they were supposed to be living honestly." Silence. "Min-jae has money," Amara continued. "Substantial money. If Naomi and Eli need something, his father has the resources. My $35,000 was never necessary. It was convenient. There's a difference. She's your sister," Loretta said quietly. "I know who she is." Amara closed her eyes for a moment. "I know exactly who she is. I know who she was 6 months ago when she called me crying at 2 in the morning and I transferred money before I was even fully awake. I know who she was when she texted me heart emojis over a crib that her boyfriend's money paid for and billed to his company as renovation materials. I know her." Loretta was quiet. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Amara said. "I need you to understand that I'm not punishing Eli, and I'm not punishing you. I'm stopping something that should have been stopped before it started. And the townhouse, not responsibility. She has a partner. He is wealthy. Let him use some of that wealth for the family he chose to build." Another silence. Longer this time. "I just don't want you to be alone through all of this," Loretta finally said. And there it was, the real thing, underneath the conversation, the actual fear that had been driving the call. Not manipulation. Just a mother who didn't know how to say "I'm scared for you" without first trying to fix the surface of everything around you. Amara's voice softened slightly. "I'm not alone. I have Celeste. I have Priya. I have work that I'm good at. That's not the same as family." "No," Amara agreed. "It's not, but it's what I have right now. And it's enough." She said goodnight and sat in the quiet of the guest room, which had begun to feel less like a temporary solution and more like her actual room, and listen to the house settle around her. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly. The ordinary sounds of a life, proceeding in its ordinary way, entirely indifferent to what was being dismantled inside it. The reassessment happened on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the first attempt. Amara arrived 20 minutes early. She sat in the small conference room where the assessment was administered and went through her notes one final time, not out of anxiety, but out of habit. The way a surgeon checks the tray, not because they doubt the prep, but because the check is part of the discipline. She submitted the assessment at 10:47 a.m. The results came back at 2:15. She read the score twice, highest on the team, not by a small margin. She sat at her desk and let that fact exist for a moment without doing anything with it. No performance of relief, no text to anyone, just the fact sitting there, solid and entirely hers. Dr. Cole appeared in her doorway at 3:0. The compliance conversion lead is yours if you want it. I want it, Amara said. Good. Dr. Cole almost smiled. Start Monday. Celeste called at 4:30 that same afternoon. Dr. Okafor finished her preliminary report. Amara straightened in her chair. It's thorough, Celeste said. Unsupported payments, personal expenditures, coded as business costs, misleading invoices across 3 separate entities. The NC Atelier trail alone accounts for a significant sum. And there's a pattern around the holding company that's going to require his attorneys to do some very careful explaining. How does Hartwell respond to this? He doesn't know yet. We present it formally at the next meeting. Celeste paused. Amara, this changes the shape of the settlement substantially. Kang Min-jae is not going to be able to wave this away. He's going to have to decide how badly he wants this to become a matter of public record. The room was very quiet. Min-jae built his empire on controlling what information goes where, Amara said. He knows that some records, once they're in the open, create problems that have nothing to do with divorce court. Exactly. She thought about the man she had watched through a hospital room window. Quiet voice, the hand on her sister's shoulder, the certainty with which he had said she'll keep paying. Send him the preliminary report, Amara said. Are you sure you want to do it before the meeting? Once he sees it. I know what he'll do. Send it. Celeste was quiet for a moment. All right. They hung up. Amara looked out her office window at the city going dark below her, the lights coming on block by block the way they always did at this hour, indifferent and reliable and entirely uninterested in any individual life. The preliminary report landed in Hartwell's inbox at 5:02 p.m. By 5:45, Celeste had received a call from Hartwell's office requesting an urgent meeting. By 6:00, Amara was on the phone with Celeste again. He wants to talk, Celeste said. I know. This is the point where he realizes the battlefield has changed. Amara picked up her coat from the back of her chair. Outside, the Chicago night was settling cold and clear over the streets. No, she said quietly. This is the point where he realizes it was never the battlefield he thought it was. She ended the call, turned off her office light, and walked out into the hallway, where the fluorescent lights hummed their steady, indifferent hum. Somewhere across the city, a man who had spent his life controlling rooms was staring at a document he had never expected anyone to assemble, and beginning to understand that the woman he had counted on to keep financing his life had been, the entire time, more meticulous than he was. Point of no return had been crossed long before either of them named it. It had been crossed at 6:47 p.m. on a rain-soaked November evening, outside room 114 of a private maternity hospital, when a woman with a blue gift bag heard exactly what she was never supposed to hear and chose, instead of fury, precision. Now the numbers were doing the rest. Hartwell's urgent meeting request sat in Celeste's calendar for exactly 48 hours before anyone agreed to a time. That had been Celeste's decision, not Amara's. Let him wait, she had said, in the flat professional tone of someone who understood that urgency was itself a negotiating position. The longer he waits, the more his client imagines what else we might have. Amara had agreed without argument. She was learning, in these weeks, the particular discipline of stillness, of not filling silence with action just because silence was uncomfortable. The meeting happened on a Thursday morning in Celeste's conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, where the windows looked out over the lake, and the water was the flat pewter color it turned in late November, when the temperature dropped below freezing and the sky forgot how to be anything but gray. Hartwell arrived with two associates. He was a tall man in his mid-50s, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once, and had since become something more useful, authoritative, composed, calibrated to project the specific variety of confidence that made opposing attorneys feel they were already slightly behind. He shook Celeste's hand with the practiced ease of someone who shook many hands and remembered none of them. Min-jae did not come. Amara noticed that immediately. She had expected him. Part of her had prepared for the particular difficulty of sitting across a conference table from the man she had shared a bed with for 11 years and looking at him as a financial adversary. She had rehearsed it, not the words, but the internal architecture of it, the way you rehearse holding your breath before going underwater. He hadn't come. She filed that away and turned her attention to Hartwell. My client appreciates the thoroughness of Dr. Okafor's preliminary report, Hartwell began, which was attorney language. For my client is frightened, and we would like to discuss how frightened he needs to be. However, we have significant concerns about the methodology and several of the characterizations. Celeste set her pen down with a soft click. Specifically, the NC Atelier payments. Our position is that these represent legitimate consulting fees for services rendered to the construction division, and that the relationship between the consultant and Ms. Caldwell's sister is a personal matter that doesn't affect the professional validity of the arrangement. Dr. Okafor reviewed 18 months of NC Atelier deliverables, Celeste said. She found 3 PDF documents, 2 of which appear to be reformatted versions of publicly available industry reports, and 1 internal memo with a date stamp that predates the company's registration by 11 days. Hartwell's expression didn't change. Our forensic team has a different read. Your forensic team has had 36 hours with a report that took Dr. Okafor 3 weeks to compile. Celeste opened the folder in front of her. We're happy to give them more time. The documentation isn't going anywhere. Amara sat beside Celeste and said nothing. This had been agreed in advance. She was here to observe, to be present as a physical fact in the room, not to speak unless directly addressed. Celeste had explained it plainly. Sometimes the most powerful thing a client can do in a negotiation is demonstrate that they are not desperate to talk. She watched Hartwell's associates make notes. She watched Hartwell's eyes move between Celeste and the documents, and occasionally, briefly, toward her, trying to read the temperature of her. She understood, trying to assess whether she was the kind of person who might fracture under the right pressure. She kept her face neutral and her hands still and let him read nothing. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. No agreements were reached. Hartwell's team left with a copy of Dr. Okafor's preliminary findings and a deadline for their formal response. In the elevator going down, Celeste said, "He's worried." I know. Not just about the divorce settlement, about what else opens up if this goes further into discovery. Amara watched the floor numbers descend. Good. She meant it. Not as cruelty. She had thought carefully about what she was and was not willing to do, where her lines were. She had no interest in Min-jae's criminal organization. She had no interest in the men who moved through his world with quiet deference and occasional menace. That was a different ecosystem with different rules, and she understood enough about it to know that inserting herself into it would not end well for anyone, including her. But his legitimate businesses, the construction firms, the import companies, the paper trails that ran between them and Naomi's consulting invoices and the holding company accounts, those were fair ground. Those were the battlefield she had chosen deliberately, and she was going to use every inch of it. The elevator opened. They walked out into the cold Michigan Avenue air. He's going to try something else, Amara said. Not a question. Probably. Celeste pulled her coat tighter. The question is what? She found out 4 days later, and it was not what she had expected. The call came from a number she didn't recognize on a Saturday afternoon when she was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. She almost didn't answer Miss Caldwell. a woman's voice. Careful. My name is Sandra Yee. I'm a journalist with the Chicago Tribune business desk. I'm working on a piece about financial practices in the commercial construction sector, and I came across some materials that I'd like to give you an opportunity to comment. Amara's hand tightened around the phone. What kind of materials, she said. Documents relating to your professional history. Specifically, records suggesting that you were a knowing participant in certain financial arrangements connected to Kang Min-jae's business operations. Kitchen was very quiet. That's not accurate, Amara said. These documents suggest that your signature appears on internal reconciliation records for several entities connected to Mr. Kang over a period of approximately 4 years. There's also correspondence. Ms. Yee. Amara's voice was level, completely level. The way a surface is level when something very precise is holding it in place. I would strongly recommend that before you publish anything, you consult your legal team about the source of those documents and the circumstances under which they were obtained. I would also recommend you contact Celeste Rowan's office. She's my attorney of record. Her number is available publicly. Pause. I'm simply offering you the chance to respond. I've responded. Contact Ms. Rowan. She ended the call. Then she sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then she called Celeste. Celeste answered on the second ring, listened without interrupting, and when Amara finished, there was a brief silence before she said, "He's trying to reframe the narrative before we get to settlement. If he can establish publicly that you were complicit in the financial irregularities, it compromises Dr. Okafor's findings and it changes the optics of who's the wronged party. He gave a journalist documents with my signature on them. Internal reconciliation records, which, as you know, you legitimately worked on as part of the administrative support you provided his businesses. The question is how they're being characterized." Amara pressed 2 fingers against her temple. "I organized records I was told were standard administrative documentation. I had no knowledge of what was being concealed within them. I know that. You know that. The goal of this move is to make a jury or a judge, or a reading public uncertain." Celeste's voice stayed measured. "This is a pressure tactic. He's hoping you panic, that you reach out directly to him, that you do something that looks reactive. I'm not going to do that. I know you're not. What I need you to do right now is send me every communication, every email, every document request, every record you touched in connection with his businesses. Everything. Tonight if possible. I already have most of it organized." A beat. "Of course you do. What does this do to our timeline?" "Complicates it. If the Tribune publishes something before we reach settlement, we're managing 2 conversations, at once legal and public. Neither one helps the other." Celeste paused. "Can you think of anyone inside his organization who might have a reason to help contextualize what you actually did versus what he's characterizing?" Amara thought. There was a man named David Cho. Min-jae's head of legitimate operations, the person who had actually assigned Amara her administrative tasks over the years, who had sent her the files and thanked her for the corrections, and who had, on at least 3 occasions, explicitly described her role as reviewing for clerical errors only. He was not inside the criminal apparatus. He was a genuine business administrator who happened to work for a man with 2 sets of books. "Possibly," she said. "Think about it carefully. If he has any loyalty to Min-jae, his loyalty to the paycheck and the clean operation. Min-jae creates the paycheck. The legal exposure creates the threat to the clean operation." She paused. "Let me think about it." She spent Sunday thinking about it, and Monday she made a call. David Cho agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Wicker Park on Tuesday morning. He arrived before her. She saw him through the window as she walked up, sitting with a coffee already in front of him, his posture carrying the particular tension of a man who understood he was doing something that required careful navigation. He was 53, Korean-American, 3rd generation. He had worked for Min-jae's legitimate businesses for 11 years, the same duration as Amara's marriage, which was a coincidence she had always found mildly interesting, and now found something else entirely. She sat down across from him. "You know why I'm calling," she said. "I have an idea, A journalist at the Tribune has documents suggesting I was a knowing participant in financial irregularities connected to Min-jae's business entities. David Cho looked at his coffee. Those documents aren't what you did, wasn't. He stopped. Reorganized, you reviewed clerical items, error corrections, formatting inconsistencies in reporting documents. You were never given access to anything that would have showed you the full picture. I know that. I need someone who can say that to the people who are currently being told differently. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a delivery truck was blocking half the street, and someone was honking without any particular hope of accomplishing anything. What happens to me, he said, if I do that? I can't promise you anything. I'm not in a position to. What I can tell you is that the forensic accounting report currently being used in my divorce proceeding documents a pattern of irregularities that, if they become part of a public record, are going to create questions about everyone who worked in proximity to those accounts. Your name is in those files, David. Not prominently, but it's there. He looked up at her. I'm not threatening you, she said. I'm telling you what exists. What you do with that information is your decision. He turned his coffee cup slowly on the table. Once. Twice. The small, careful gesture of a man who was running calculations. I'll provide a written statement, he finally said, describing the scope of what you were asked to do. I'll be specific about what access you had and what access you didn't. That's all I need. He nodded. Then he's not going to. Min-jae isn't going to. Min-jae is going to do whatever Min-jae decides to do. That's his choice, not yours. She stood. Thank you, David. She walked out into the cold Wicker Park morning, feeling something she identified after a moment as cautious. Not relieved, cautious. Because she understood something that the last several weeks had been teaching her in progressively sharper lessons. The moment you felt secure was usually the moment the floor moved. The floor moved on Wednesday. Celeste called at 7:42 a.m., before Amara had left for work. There's a problem, Celeste said. No preamble. Which was itself information. Celeste always had preamble. Dr. Okafor received a call last night from someone representing themselves as a compliance official at the State Licensing Board. They indicated there's an open inquiry into her methodology in a previous case. Amara set down her coffee. Is there an inquiry? She said. Her attorney is looking into it. As of this morning, there's no formal filing. No case number, nothing on record. But the call was enough to make Dr. Okafor cautious. She's indicated she may need to delay finalizing the full report pending clarification of her professional standing. The room was very quiet. He's trying to pull the report, Amara said. He's trying to create enough uncertainty around the report that it can't be cleanly entered as evidence. If Dr. Okafor is under any kind of professional inquiry, even a frivolous one, Hartwell can argue the findings are compromised. Can he do that? Can he actually manufacture a licensing inquiry? Not formally, but a phone call to a board official costs nothing. A suggestion of irregularity, even unfounded, creates a delay. The delay creates a window. Celeste paused. This is what he does, Amara. This is how he operates outside the courtroom. He doesn't fight the evidence directly. He destabilizes the people carrying it. Amara walked to the window. Below, the street was doing its ordinary morning business. People moving. Cars moving, the city indifferent to the specific shape of any individual disaster. What do we do? Two things. First, Dr. Okafor's attorney challenges the inquiry's legitimacy, gets documentation, forces whoever is behind it to put their name to it formally, which they almost certainly won't be willing to do. Second, Celeste took a breath. We need a backup. Someone who can corroborate the core findings independently, so that, even if Dr. Okafor's report is delayed, the substance doesn't disappear. A second forensic accountant. Yes, and it needs to happen fast. I'll cover the cost. I know. Amara hung up and stood at the window for a moment. She thought about Min-jae in that conference room he hadn't bothered to attend. She thought about the journalist with the tribunal documents. She thought about Dr. Okafor receiving a phone call in the evening at her home from someone who knew her name and her previous cases and exactly which pressure point to press. She thought, he is not trying to win the argument. He is trying to make the argument impossible. And she thought, this is who he has always been. This is the man she had been sleeping beside for 11 years. Not the construction magnate, not the cold-voiced power in expensive suits. This the phone calls, the manufactured pressure, the systematic dismantling of opposition, not through confrontation, but through erosion. She had organized his records. She had cleaned up his edges. She had unknowingly helped him practice exactly this. The thought sat in her chest with a weight she couldn't metabolize immediately. She picked up her bag and went to work. The second forensic accountant was a firm in Milwaukee that Celeste had used twice before. They agreed to begin immediately. Their preliminary review would take 10 days. On day 3 of those 10 days, Amara came home from work to find her mother sitting on the front step. Not calling, not texting. Sitting on the step in a winter coat with a grocery bag beside her, the way she used to sit on the front step when Amara and Naomi were children, and she was waiting for one of them to come home late and explain themselves. Amara sat down beside her. "How long have you been out here?" she said. "About 20 minutes. Loretta didn't look at her. I tried knocking, but I figured you weren't home." "I was at work." "I know you were. You're always at work." Not accusatory. Just factual. They sat in silence for a moment. The street was quiet. A dog somewhere 2 houses down was voicing its objections to something. "Naomi called me," Loretta said. Amara waited. "She says Min-jae's lawyer sent her some kind of document. Something about the financial investigation." Loretta finally turned to look at her. "She says it mentions her name in ways that could. She says she might need her own lawyer." "She probably does." Amara, Mom, Naomi received payments through a shell company for services she didn't provide. That's a documented fact. Whether anyone pursues it legally is a separate question, but it's documented. She didn't know it was. She says she didn't know how he was categorizing it. That may be true. Amara looked at the street. It may also be a position she's going to need to defend. Either way, I didn't create that situation. Min-jae created it. He put her name on those invoices. He built that structure. Whatever exposure she has comes from his choices, not mine. Loretta was quiet for a long time. "I'm not asking you to forgive anyone," she said finally, and her voice had changed lower now. The performance of reasonableness dropped, something more real underneath it. "I'm asking you to think about what happens to this family when all of this is—" "Mom." Amara turned to face her. "What family? Tell me what family you're describing." "The one where Naomi and Min-jae planned to use the money I borrowed against my house to set up a life together and then counted on you and Eli to keep me from reacting? That family? Because I need you to understand that plan required your participation. Not your consent, your existence as leverage. They calculated that your opinion of me and my love for Eli would be enough to keep me paying." Loretta's face did something complicated. "They used you too," Amara said. Quietly, not in anger. "They counted on you to come to me and say the baby didn't do anything." Which is true. Eli is innocent. But they knew you would say it and they banked on it working. That's not love, Mom. That's strategy. The dog down the street stopped barking. Loretta sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the grocery bag she had brought food. Probably the instinct of a mother for whom cooking was the closest available form of "I don't know what else to do," and she said nothing for a long time. "Then I didn't know all of it. I know you didn't. I thought Naomi said you knew Min-jae was unhappy. That you both knew the marriage was—" No, Amara's voice was very quiet. "I didn't know. I had no idea. As far as I knew, we had a complicated marriage the way most marriages are complicated. And I was managing it the way I managed everything." Loretta pressed her lips together. "She told you I knew," Amara said. "Not a question," she implied. Loretta stopped, closed her eyes. "Yes." The word landed between them with a specific weight. Naomi had not just betrayed Amara to Min-jae. She had built a parallel narrative for their mother, a version of events in which Amara was already detached, already checked out, already the proximate cause of her own displacement. A version in which what Naomi had done was not predatory, but simply necessary. Amara absorbed this. She absorbed the fact that the blueprint had been more comprehensive than she understood. Not just her money, not just her marriage. Her character, the public version of it, the version her mother held, had been quietly pre-damaged, prepared for a story in which she was already the distant one, already the cold one, already the one who had made space for what followed. The wave of it moved through her. Not the sharp pain of fresh betrayal, something slower. The understanding that the excavation was not finished, splitting. That every time she thought she had reached the bottom of what they had built without her knowledge, there was another level. She breathed. She stood. "Come inside," she said to her mother. "I'll make tea." That night, after her mother left calmer, quieter, carrying something Amara could see she would need a long time to process, Amara sat at the kitchen table with her phone and a legal pad and began writing. Not for Celeste, not for the case. She wrote out everything Naomi had apparently told Loretta. Cross-referenced it against what she knew of the timeline. She noted the specific framing, the suggestion that Amara had known the marriage was struggling, that there had been some implicit understanding. Then she pulled up the financial record she had built over the previous weeks and added a new column. Narrative management, because that was what it was. Min-jae managed information the way other people managed money strategically, with a long view, with careful attention to which details reached which audience. And Naomi had been his instrument for the version aimed at their family. Question now was what else had been managed, that Amara didn't yet know about. The answer arrived the following morning. Marcus, Celeste paralegal, called at 8:55 a.m. with a voice that had shed its customary flatness. "Ms. Caldwell, we've received a counterfiling from Hartwell's office." "I expected that. There's a component we didn't anticipate." A brief pause. "They've filed a claim asserting that you had knowledge of and materially benefited from certain financial practices connected to Mr. Kang's business operations over a 4-year period. They're characterizing your administrative role as active participation." The office around her continued its ordinary morning noise. Keyboards. Someone's phone. The elevator chimed down the hall. "They're not just going after the report," she said. "No. They're going after you directly. If they can establish, even suggest that you were a willing participant, they reframe the entire asset division. Your claim becomes compromised. Dr. Okafor's findings get framed as the work of an interested party, not an independent examiner." Amara set her pen down. "They're claiming I was complicit." "Yes." In writing, in a legal filing. Yes. She thought about 11 years. She thought about every evening she had spent at that kitchen table with files Min-jae had characterized as straightforward administrative review. She thought about how clean everything had looked from inside, how orderly, how reasonable, how much like the normal extension of being married to a man with complicated business interests. She thought about the specific and terrible irony of being accused of participating in a deception she had been the primary victim of. "Marcus," she said, "please tell Celeste I need to see her today." "She's already cleared her afternoon." "Good." Amara picked up her pen again. "One more thing, David Cho. The statement he agreed to provide. We need it formally executed before end of week. I'll make that call first." She hung up and sat very still. She had known Min-jae would not go quietly. She had known he would fight. She had prepared for a difficult settlement, for delays, for pressure tactics, for the journalist, for the manufactured inquiry into Dr. Okafor. She had not fully prepared for this, the pivot from defense to offense, the move from protecting his assets to attacking her credibility, not slowing her down but coming directly at her standing professional, legal, personal. If Hartwell's filing gained any traction, even a shadow of complicity attached to her name in the public record, her compliance directorship became fragile. Dr. Cole was fair, but a healthcare management firm could not afford to carry a director under active legal scrutiny for financial impropriety, even unfounded scrutiny. He had found the pressure point she hadn't fully defended. She looked at the legal pad in front of her. She thought about the woman she had been 6 weeks ago, sitting outside room 114 with a gift bag, choosing precision over fury. She had been right to choose it. The precision had produced the forensic report, the timeline, the NC Atelier documentation. David Cho's statement, the Milwaukee firm's independent review. But Precision had assumed a certain kind of opponent, one who would respond to evidence with negotiation. Min-jae was not responding with negotiation. He was burning the field, splitting, which meant she needed to stop thinking like a compliance director and start thinking like someone who understood that the goal was not to win a clean argument. The goal was to make the cost of continuing this fight higher than the cost of ending it. She picked up her pen, turned to a clean page on the legal pad, and began writing a different kind of list. Not what she had, not what she could prove, what he stood to lose if every piece of what she had became fully, permanently, irreversibly public. She wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. When she finished, she looked at the page. Then she picked up her phone and called Celeste. "I need you to do something," she said when Celeste answered. "I need you to request a full deposition, not a settlement meeting. A deposition. Min-jae, on record, under oath, answering specific questions about the NC Atelier payments, the holding company, and the scope of financial activities conducted through his legitimate business entities." Silence on the other end. Amara. "A deposition at this stage escalates everything significantly." "I know. If he answers under oath and those answers conflict with what doctor?" Okafor found it does. Another silence. Longer. "He'll either settle to avoid it," Celeste said slowly, "or he'll sit for it and commit to a story that the forensic record contradicts." "Yes. Either way, it ends the field burning, because the field gets a lot more dangerous for him." "Yes." Celeste was quiet for a moment. "He's not going to like this," she said. Amara looked at the page of notes in front of her. 40 minutes of clear-eyed accounting. Every liability. Every exposure. Every thread that, pulled in open court, would unravel things that had nothing to do with the divorce and everything to do with the other half of Kang Min-jae's life, the half that didn't appear in any legitimate filing. "No," she said. "He's not going to like it at all." She ended the call. Outside her office window, Chicago was doing what Chicago did in December, pressing its cold down on everything, indifferent and unrelenting, the kind of cold that didn't care what you were carrying or how long you'd been carrying it. She had spent 11 years being the kind of woman who absorbed difficulty quietly, who solved problems in the background, who made things orderly so other people could move through the world, unobstructed. She was done being the background. The deposition request landed in Hartwell's inbox at 3:17 p.m. By 4:00, Celeste had a voicemail from Hartwell himself, not his associate, not Marcus's counterpart, but Hartwell directly saying he would like to discuss, at the earliest possible opportunity, whether there might be a path toward resolution that served everyone's interests. Amara read the transcript of the voicemail that evening. She read it twice. Then she set it down and made herself dinner and ate it standing at the counter, looking out the kitchen window at the dark yard, and let herself feel just for a moment, in the privacy of her own house, the specific and earned satisfaction of having forced a man who controlled an empire to pick up his own phone and make his own call. It was not victory. Not yet. But it was the end of the version of this fight where she was the one on defense. Hartwell called back personally at 9:02 the following morning. Celeste took the call with Amara sitting across from her desk, and she had the speaker on low enough that Amara had to lean slightly forward to catch every word. Hartwell's voice through the phone carried a different texture than it had in the conference room still controlled, still professionally warm, but underneath it something tighter. Specific tension of a man who had gone home the previous evening and run his own calculations and found the numbers less comfortable than he'd expected. "My client would like to explore a resolution framework," Hartwell said, "without the formality of a deposition proceeding." Celeste looked at Amara. Amara gave a single small nod. "We're open to conversation," Celeste said. "Our position on the underlying documentation hasn't changed." "Understood. I think there may be room to discuss asset allocation in a way that addresses your client's core concerns without requiring further escalation. Further escalation being the deposition." A brief pause. "Among other things. We can meet Friday, Celeste. Same room as last time, 10 o'clock. She ended the call and set the phone down and looked at Amara with the expression of someone who had won a procedural point and was not yet ready to celebrate it, because procedural points were not the same as victories. "He's going to come in Friday with a number," Celeste said. "It won't be the right number. No, first offer never is. But it tells us what he thinks we'll accept, which tells us something about what he's most afraid of." She leaned back. "The deposition request did exactly what you thought it would. He doesn't want Min-jae on record. Min-jae under oath answering questions about those accounts, about Tensi Atelier, about the holding company. Every answer either confirms what Dr. Okafor found or creates a perjury exposure. Neither option is manageable." Celeste tapped her pen once against the desk. "He'll try to buy his way out of it before Friday." "Good," Amara said. "Let him try." She went back to work. She had 412 healthcare employees whose payroll was running 11 days behind the original projection due to a data migration error in the benefits mapping system. And she had 2 junior analysts who were good but not yet fast enough to close the gap without oversight. And she had approximately 6 hours of her own attention available per day for the project on top of everything else she was managing. She used all 6 hours. She mapped the migration error herself. She identified the point in the benefits mapping sequence where the system had failed to recognize legacy codes from the previous platform, built a correction protocol, tested it twice, documented it clearly enough that her analysts could execute without her watching, and had it running by 4 p.m. By 5 p.m., they were 8 days behind instead of 11. She drove home in the dark and ate leftovers standing over the sink and did not think about Friday. Or she tried not to. She was not always successful. What she thought about, when she couldn't stop herself, was the gathering. The small family event she had been told about, through Celeste Loretta had called neutral in tone, trying to be fair in the way she always tried to be fair when she understood that fairness was going to be nearly impossible, and said that she was planning a small gathering for Eli's 10-day milestone. Family only, low-key. She wanted both her daughters present. Amara had sat with the invitation for 2 days before answering. She understood what attending meant. It meant being in the same room as Min-jae and Naomi, with the divorce proceeding active and the forensic findings on the table, and Hartwell's counterfiling, claiming her complicity still formally in the record. It meant her mother's house, which was neutral ground in theory and contested in practice. It meant Eli. She thought about Eli, not strategically, just directly a 10-day-old person who had not chosen any of this, who would grow up in the shape of what the adults around him had constructed, and who deserved, from every adult in his orbit, the specific kindness of being treated as a person rather than a symbol. She RSVP'd yes. She bought a gift, drove to a children's boutique in Lincoln Park on her lunch break, and stood in the store for 12 minutes before selecting a knitted blanket in cream and pale blue, because she had already ordered one like it that had been made irrelevant by what she had learned. And because Eli had never been irrelevant, and she refused to let what his parents had done turn her into the kind of person who punished a baby for his genealogy. She had the name stitched again, Eli. She carried the gift bag to the gathering. Loretta's house smelled the way it always smelled something cooking, something warm, the specific domestic density of a place where a family had lived long enough that the walls had absorbed their presence. Amara arrived at 6 p.m. She had planned to arrive at 6, which was on time, not early enough to have to make conversation before there were enough people in the room to diffuse it, and not late enough to make an entrance that could be read as strategic. Min-jae was already there. He was standing near the window with a glass of water, and he had brought one of his men, not a bodyguard exactly, or rather, not visibly, but Amara recognized the type, mid-30s, quiet, positioned near the door in the way people position themselves near doors when their actual job is to know where all the doors are. She noted it without showing that she noted it. Naomi was on the couch with Eli. Amara looked at the baby first, 10 days old, the slack, total trust of a person who has not yet learned that the world requires anything of them. He was wrapped in a hospital-issued blanket, and Amara set the gift bag beside the bassinet and did not make a moment of it. She said hello to her mother. She accepted tea. She sat in the armchair near the bookcase that was furthest from Min-jae without making the distance obvious. For 20 minutes, the room maintained a careful fiction of normality. Loretta talked about Eli's feeding schedule. Naomi said something about sleep. Min-jae said almost nothing. He watched the room the way he always watched rooms, the habitual surveillance of a man who spent his professional life reading environments for advantage. Amara drank her tea and watched nothing in particular, and felt the tension in the room the way you feel barometric pressure before a storm, not dramatic, not acute, just present. Accumulated. Building. It broke when Loretta went to the kitchen. The moment her footsteps moved down the hallway, the temperature shifted. Min-jae turned from the window. His man by the door went still in a particular way that meant he had closer attention. Naomi looked at her lap. "You're going to depose me," Min-jae said. Not a question, not an accusation, just a fact placed into the room for acknowledgement. "My attorney filed a request," Amara said. "I know what your attorney filed." He crossed to the chair across from her, not threatening but deliberate, the movement of a man who wanted physical proximity to this conversation and was accustomed to taking what he wanted. He sat. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, the posture of someone forcing an intimacy. "You want me under oath. I want this resolved. Then resolve it. Name a number." "It's not about a number, Min-jae. Everything is about a number. Not this." She met his eyes. "You filed a legal claim asserting I was a knowing participant in financial irregularities. You gave a journalist documents designed to make me look complicit in things I didn't know were happening. You made a phone call that put pressure on my forensic accountant." She kept her voice at the same level throughout. "Measured, without heat. Those aren't negotiating positions. Those are attacks on my career and my character. A settlement number doesn't undo those." He studied her. "The journalist that wasn't... Now the heat, just slightly. Don't insult me by claiming you don't know how that happened." He closed his mouth. "The deposition stands until I have something in writing that addresses the complicity claim," Amara said. "Not a settlement number. A formal withdrawal of the counterfiling." The room was very quiet. "You know what you're asking," he said. "Yes. If I withdraw that filing, Hartwell loses the leverage we need to. I know what it costs you. That's why I'm asking for it." She set her tea down. "You built something on the assumption that I would absorb it. I'm telling you, the absorption is done. You want the deposition off the table. Give me the withdrawal." Min-jae sat back. His jaw worked slightly. The one tell she had identified over 11 years, the thing his face did when he was running calculations that weren't resolving the way he wanted. "You're serious," he said. "When have I not been serious?" He looked at her for a long moment. And then he turned and looked at Naomi, and the look between them was communicative, in a way that Amara could read the shape of without knowing the specific contents. A look that said, "This is not what we expected, and now we need to decide." Then Loretta came back from the kitchen. The room reconstituted itself. Min-jae leaned back. Naomi adjusted Eli. Amara picked up her tea. Loretta set a plate of food on the coffee table and looked at her daughters and her ex-son-in-law and understood, in the way mothers understand things they are not told, that something had just happened. She said nothing. She sat down and served herself, and kept her face kind and open, and gave everyone in the room the gift of not pushing on what was not yet ready to be pushed. Friday came. Amara dressed for the conference room, the way she dressed for every professional engagement, where the stakes were high, not to intimidate, not to perform, but to ensure that her appearance communicated exactly one thing: "I am prepared." Dark blazer, simple jewelry, nothing that moved or caught light unnecessarily. She had slept 6 hours, which was enough, and she had eaten breakfast, which was also enough. She arrived at Celeste Building at 9:40. Marcus had coffee waiting. She drank it standing at the window, looking at the lake. Hartwell and his 2 associates arrived at 10:03. Min-jae arrived separately at 10:07. He came alone this time, no associates, no quiet man near the door. Just him, in a charcoal coat, looking like what he was, a powerful man in an unfamiliar position, which is to say a man who had been forced to come to someone else's room. He sat across the table, He did not look at Amara immediately. Hartwell opened his folder. We've given Dr. Okafor's preliminary report significant consideration. Our position remains that several of the characterizations are overstated. However, my client is prepared to discuss a settlement framework that... Before we discuss a framework, Celeste said, we need to address the counterfiling. Hartwell's expression moved slightly. We're prepared to discuss modification of the minutes. Withdrawal, Celeste said. Not modification. Withdrawal. Ms. Rowan, a complete withdrawal would require. We're not proceeding with settlement discussion, while a legal filing characterizing my client as a willing participant in financial irregularities remains on the record. Celeste's voice was entirely flat. That's our position. It hasn't changed since Monday, and it's not going to change today. Silence. Min-jae looked at Hartwell. Hartwell looked at his folder. I'll need a few minutes with my client, Hartwell said. Celeste gestured toward the door. The small conference room at the end of the hall is available. They left. The door closed behind them. Amara and Celeste sat in the resulting quiet, and Celeste reached across and poured herself more coffee with the composed efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times and had learned that the waiting was simply part of the work. He's going to do it, Celeste said quietly. I know. It means they're more afraid of the deposition than they're letting on. Yes. Which means there are things in those accounts that go beyond what Dr. Okafor found. Amara looked at her coffee. There are always things beyond what the first review finds. Celeste was quiet for a moment. Are you going to want to know what they are? It was a real question, not procedural. Celeste asking her, directly whether she wanted to pull every thread, or whether there was a point at which she was willing to let the unknowable remain unknown in exchange for the ending she needed. Amara thought about it honestly. No, she said finally. I want what's mine. I want my name clean. I want the record to show what happened and who did what. I don't need to know everything he ever did. She paused. That's a different fight. Not mine. Celeste nodded once. 14 minutes later, Hartwell and Min-jae came back. Hartwell sat down, opened his folder again, did not look at Amara. My client is prepared to withdraw the counterfiling, he said, as part of a comprehensive settlement agreement. Celeste set her pen down. Then let's talk. What followed was 4 hours. 4 hours that Amara would later remember, not as a single experience but as a series of isolated moments, each one with its own specific weight. The moment Hartwell put a settlement number on the table that was insultingly low, and Celeste didn't even write it down. The moment Min-jae leaned forward and said something directly to Amara, not through Hartwell, not through Celeste, directly to her, and what he said was, I know you're going to take everything you can. And she said back, quietly, clearly, I'm going to take what's fair. That's worse than everything, Min-jae. Because you can't argue with fair. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away. The number moved. It moved again. Celeste pushed on the NC Atelier documentation, and the number moved a third time. When they broke for lunch, sandwiches brought in, nobody going anywhere, Amara sat at one end of the table and looked at the documents in front of her and thought about what fair actually meant when the math was this complicated. Fair meant the marital assets accurately accounted for. Fair meant the $18,740 she had spent supporting Naomi recognized as what it was, a diversion of marital resources, and credited accordingly. Fair meant the specified business obligations that acknowledged what had been improperly categorized. Fair did not mean ruin. It did not mean she would take his businesses, his organization, the empire he had built before they met and expanded during their marriage, with both their labor, hers invisible, his not. She was not trying to take everything. She was trying to take what was real. They came back to the table after 20 minutes. The number moved twice more. At 3:47 p.m., Celeste wrote a figure on a legal pad and slid it across the table to Hartwell. Hartwell looked at it, showed it to Min-jae without expression. Min-jae looked at it. Then he looked at Amara. The look lasted approximately 4 seconds. She held it without flinching and without heat and without anything except the steady, clear, irrefutable presence of a woman who had done the work and knew exactly what the work had produced. Min-jae said one word to Hartwell. Hartwell wrote something on his own pad. Slid it back. The figure was within range. They did not finalize that day. Finalizing required drafting, review, signatures across multiple documents, addressing the asset division, the business obligations, the formal withdrawal of the counterfiling. A sound scene splitting, and the stipulation that neither party would make public statements about the forensic findings beyond what was required by law. That took another week. During that week, Amara ran a payroll conversion for 412 healthcare employees and got the project within 2 days of the original timeline. She answered emails. She attended a department meeting where Dr. Cole recognized her team's work in front of the full division. She made coffee every morning in her own kitchen and drank it, looking out her own window, and felt the strange, hollow, specific relief of someone who has been in a fight for so long that the prospect of the fight ending produces not joy but something quieter, the simple absence of dread. She also attended Eli's pediatric appointment, not because anyone asked her to. Naomi had texted cautiously, briefly asking if Amara wanted to come, and Amara had sat with the text for 20 minutes before typing back yes. She sat in the waiting room of the pediatrician's office with Naomi beside her, both of them watching Eli in his carrier with the focused, helpless attention of people who had nothing else to agree on, but found this one thing, this small, breathing, entirely uncomplicated person to be enough. They did not talk about the settlement. They did not talk about Min-jae. Naomi said he gained 4 ounces. Amara looked at Eli's face. He looks like he's thinking very hard about something. He always looks like that. He'll be stubborn. The words were out before she caught them, the echo of what she'd heard through the hospital door, Min-jae's voice. Naomi heard it too. She went quiet. I'm sorry, Naomi said. Not about the word. About all of it. The apology was too small for everything it was trying to cover, which both of them understood, and neither of them pointed out. I know, Amara said. The pediatrician came out and called Eli's name, and they both stood up and went in. The settlement documents were signed on a Thursday. Amara signed in Celeste's office at 11 a.m. Min-jae signed, through his attorney, at a separate location which Celeste had arranged, because she understood without being asked that Amara did not need to be in the room for that. When it was done, Marcus brought in coffee. Celeste allowed herself a single visible expression of satisfaction. He retained the businesses, Celeste said. His operational empire is intact. But he accepted the specified obligations, the asset credit, and the formal acknowledgement that funds were diverted. That's on record. I know. You didn't get everything. I got what was real. Celeste looked at her for a moment. Yes, you did. Amara drove home. She parked in her own driveway and sat in the car with the engine off, feeling the quiet come down around her. No calls to make, no documents to review, no number to move or calculation to run. Just the house. Her house, for now it would go on the market, the proceeds split per the agreement. She had 2 months. Then she would find somewhere smaller, somewhere fully hers, somewhere with no history embedded in the walls. She went inside and made dinner and ate it at the table, with the window dark outside and the kitchen lights on and the ordinary specific silence of a person who was, for the first time in months, not managing anything except herself. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Min-jae. She stared at it for 3 rings. He was allowed to call. The settlement did not prohibit communication. It only structured the financial terms. She was not afraid of him. She had not been afraid of him since the night she sat in the hospital parking structure and chose precision over panic, and everything that followed had confirmed that the choice was correct. She answered. The documents went through, he said. His voice sounded different through the phone, smaller. Not weak. Min-jae did not do weak. It was not part of his architecture, but something closer to ordinary. Stripped of the conference room, stripped of Hartwell. Just a man calling a woman he had known for 11 years. I know, she said. Celeste confirmed, a pause. I want to stop. I'm not going to say I didn't think you'd another stop. She waited. I underestimated you, he said finally. From the beginning of this, I thought I knew exactly what you would do. She looked at the window. Her own reflection, looking back at her, the kitchen lights making a mirror of the dark glass. "You knew what I had done," she said. "You didn't know what I was capable of." Silence. "No," he said, "I didn't." She breathed once. Min-jae, take care of Eli. Not financially, you'll be fine. You'll always be fine. Actually, take care of him. Be honest with him. Whatever you two built, make sure the child in it grows up knowing the difference between being cared for and being used. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. "Okay," he said. She ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table with her phone face down, in front of her, and the refrigerator, humming its steady low note, and outside the first real snow of the season, beginning to come down, she hadn't noticed when it started falling in the light. From the neighbor's porch lamp, in slow, irregular curtains. She watched it for a while. Then she opened her laptop. The Milwaukee firm had submitted their full report that morning. She had not read it yet, had been deliberately waiting until the settlement was done, so that whatever it contained would be information rather than ammunition, something she was reading to understand rather than to deploy. She read it now. It was thorough, 41 pages. Dr. Okafor's preliminary findings confirmed and expanded across 4 additional categories. The pattern was systematic, not the work of a man who had stumbled into something, but the architecture of a person who had made a considered decision about what his wife's labor and trust were worth, and had built his financial operations accordingly. She read to the end. Then she closed the laptop. She sat in the kitchen with the snow coming down outside and felt not anger, not vindication, something harder to name, the specific weight of understanding something completely, of having every piece in front of you and no longer needing to guess at what the picture was. The picture was clear. It had always been clear. She simply hadn't been given the whole canvas until now. She stood, washed her dinner dishes, dried them, put them away. Then she went to the hallway closet and got out the boxes she had brought home from the office supply store 2 weeks ago. Anticipating this moment, the moment when the fighting was done and the packing could begin. She set the first box on the living room floor, looked around at 11 years of accumulated life books, photographs, the particular furniture of a shared existence, and understood that what she was about to do was not loss. It was excavation. She was removing herself from a story that had been written around her without her knowledge, and what she found underneath, what had always been underneath, waiting was hers. She picked up the first book from the shelf, looked at the spine, set it in the box. Outside, the snow kept falling, indifferent and clean, and covering everything equally, the mistakes and the dignities and the ordinary Tuesday nights and the night. Outside room 114, and every moment in between, covering it all in the same white, which was not forgiveness and was not erasure, but was simply what came next, the world insisting on continuing, regardless of what anyone had done in it. Amara packed until midnight. Then she stopped, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow there would be more boxes. Tonight she had done enough. But across the city, in the apartment she had never seen and did not need to see, a phone was ringing, Naomi's phone, the screen showing a number Naomi recognized, and when she answered, the voice on the other end was not Min-jae, and not her mother, and not Amara, but Hartwell's associate, calling to inform her that in the process of finalizing the settlement documentation, question had arisen regarding the NC Atelier registration and certain filings that bore her signature, and that she might want to consider retaining independent counsel before the week was out. Naomi sat in the apartment with Eli asleep beside her and listened to the words and felt the floor shift in the specific way it shifts when you understand that the bill has arrived and it is larger than you priced. She had known, abstractly, that there would be a bill. She had not known it would come this fast, or feel this cold, or land in the exact same quiet hour she had begun, cautiously, tentatively, to believe the worst was behind her. She sat with the phone in her lap long after the call ended and looked at her son's sleeping face and thought about the word Amara had used, months ago, in a sentence she had not fully absorbed at the time. Infrastructure. She thought about what it meant to have built your future on someone else's capacity to hold things together. and what it felt like when that capacity was withdrawn, not in anger but in clear-eyed, documented, irrefutable clarity. She thought through three conditions Amara had not yet stated, but that Naomi already understood, somewhere in the part of herself that had always known her sister better than she'd admitted, were coming. She looked at Eli. She reached out and adjusted the edge of the blanket. Cream and pale blue, Eli's name stitched across the corner. She had not told Amara thank you for the blanket. She had not told Amara thank you for most things. That was the accounting she had not yet begun, and it had nothing to do with money, and it was going to be the hardest math she had ever done. Eli breathed in and out in the small, steady rhythm of someone who trusted completely that the world would still be there when he opened his eyes. Naomi sat with him in the dark and did not sleep, and waited for morning. The boxes took 11 days. Not because there was so much to pack, the house was large, but Amara had always been someone who owned what she used and used what she owned. A sound like green wood splitting, without the accumulation that happened when people bought things to fill the shape of a life rather than to live it. The 11 days were slow because she refused to rush. She had spent 11 years building something inside these walls, and she was going to take it apart the way she had built it, deliberately, without performance, one decision at a time. She started in the study. The study had been the room most thoroughly colonized by their shared life, his desk pushed against one wall, her work surface along the other, the filing cabinet in the corner that held both their documents in adjacent drawers, the organizational logic of two people who had built a household, the way you build anything meant to last, with interlocking systems and shared infrastructure, and the quiet assumption that the infrastructure would outlast any individual disagreement. She pulled every document, sorted by ownership. What was hers went into the clear plastic bin she had bought at the hardware store. What was his went into a separate pile she had arranged to have collected by a courier who knew nothing about the situation and wanted to know nothing. On the third day, she found a folder she didn't recognize immediately. It was wedged behind the lower drawer, the kind of place things ended up not through intent but through the accumulated sliding of time papers that had been filed quickly during a busy week, pushed a little too far, forgotten. She pulled it out and looked at the tab. Her handwriting. She opened it. Inside, copies of the reconciliation documents she had prepared for Min-jae's import company over 4 years ago. Her edits in red pen, her initials at the bottom of each page. The records she had touched, believing they were straightforward administrative review, that she was catching clerical errors for a husband whose legitimate business ran too fast for his administrative staff to keep up. She looked at her own handwriting for a long time. She thought about the forensic report, the Milwaukee firm's 41 pages, the systematic architecture of a man who had decided what his wife's labor was worth and built his financial operations around that calculation. Her clean edits, her careful corrections, a frame around a picture she had never been shown. She had been good at it. That was the thing that sat heaviest. She had been genuinely, professionally skilled at the work, and he had known it, had relied on it, had structured the concealment around her competence, the way you build a load-bearing wall around the strongest material available. She set the folder in her pile, not his. Hers evidence of work performed, time given, skill deployed without full information. It belonged with her. She closed the drawer and kept packing. On the 6th evening, Naomi called. Amara was sitting on the bedroom floor, surrounded by the particular archaeology of a shared closet, his side already empty. Hers in the process of being reduced to what was actually hers, rather than what had accumulated in the gravitational field of cohabitation. She let the call ring twice before answering, not from strategy, but because she needed to finish deciding what to do with a cashmere sweater she had bought during a weekend they spent in New York 3 years ago. A sound, good sweater, which she was going to keep, because garments did not inherit the moral weight of the occasions during which they were purchased. She set the sweater in the keep pile and answered. Naomi's voice was different. Not the flattened exhaustion of the voicemail she had left earlier in the week, something with more structure in it, like a person who had spent several days doing something difficult and had come through it changed but not broken. I retained Diane Marsh, Naomi said. She took my call same day. Good. She said the NC Atelier exposure is. She said it's real, but it's workable. She said Min-jae's team is going to want to minimize the parts that lead back to him, which means they won't push hard on the components that primarily lead to me. That's accurate. A pause. Longer than conversation required. How do you know Diane Marsh? Naomi said. Amara picked up another sweater from the pile. Examined it. I work in financial compliance. It's a small professional world. That's not what I'm asking. The room was quiet. Outside, the first real dark of evening was settling over the street and someone somewhere close had their television on. The particular muffled warmth of it audible through the wall. The NC Atelier exposure could have been worse than it is, Amara said. The specific shape of it, the way it landed, left certain paths more navigable than others. Diane Marsh has navigated exactly those paths before. Silence. Did you? Naomi stopped. Were you when you were talking to Celeste the settlement, when you were deciding how to structure it? She stopped again. A sound like when she continued, her voice had the quality of someone who has understood something they were not sure they wanted to understand. You could have pushed harder on the NC Atelier component. You could have made it worse for me than it is. Amara said nothing. You didn't. The settlement addressed what was mine to address, Amara said. Your exposure to NC Atelier exists because of how Min-jae structured it. That's not the same conversation as mine. But you could have... Naomi. She set the sweater down. I need you to hear 3 things, and I need you to hear them as conditions, not as sentiment. Because I'm not capable of sentiment with you right now. Maybe later. Not now. Naomi was quiet. Tell the truth. About everything, in every room, going forward. Not the version that makes things easier for you in the moment. The actual truth. A breath on the other end. Never ask me for money. That part of us is finished. I love you, and it is finished. Okay. And never put Eli between us. Not as a reason, not as a lever, not as a way to make me feel responsible for the consequences of your choices. He is a child. He is not a negotiating position. The silence that followed had weight in it. The kind that came not from emptiness, but from someone absorbing something too large to absorb quickly. Then Naomi said, okay. Small. Undressed. The single most honest syllable Amara had heard from her sister in longer than she could accurately calculate. Okay, Amara said. They stayed on the line for another half-minute without speaking. And in that silence was the first faint outline of something that was not reconciliation and was possibly the precondition, but was possibly the precondition for both 2 people in separate rooms. Separated by months of compounded betrayal, choosing not to hang up. He smiled today, Naomi said. Eli. The doctor says it's probably reflexive at this age. Probably, Amara said. Send me a picture anyway. The picture arrived 12 minutes later. She looked at it for a long time before she saved it. The small face. The blanket she had ordered twice because she had believed both times that the person receiving it deserved it. She saved it to her phone and went back to packing. The house sold in 18 days. The young couple who bought it came to the showing with a dog named Biscuit and eyes full of the terrifying specific hope of people standing at the beginning of something they had been saving for. The woman kept touching the kitchen counter. The man kept looking at the ceiling in the way people looked at ceilings when they were calculating futures. Amara signed the closing documents on a Thursday morning in a title office that smelled of industrial carpet and printer toner, which was the smell of the ordinary administrative machinery of consequence. And when it was done, she shook hands and walked out into a December day that had decided against all meteorological precedent to be briefly warm. She sat in her car and looked at the closing documents in her hands and felt the particular flat follows, the completions of something that has been impending for a long time, not relief, not grief, just the absence of the weight of anticipating it. She started the car. The new place was 40 minutes north in traffic, which today was 35. And she knew this because she had driven it 11 times in the previous month, twice for showings, once for inspection, once for the pre-closing walkthrough. Sparcy was felty. And 7 times simply because she was learning the route, making it familiar, turning it from a commute into something that pointed home. The townhouse stood on a block of similar townhouses, modest in the way that things were modest when they were size to one person's actual life, rather than the projected scale of something aspirational. She had looked at larger places. She had looked at apartments. She had looked at a condo in the West Loop that was undeniably beautiful and that she had walked through and felt nothing toward, which she took as information. The townhouse had maple trees out front. They were bare in December, which meant she was trusting the structure of them, the architecture of bare branches visible against the winter sky, and the judgment that they would be extraordinary in spring. She was learning to trust structure. It had served her well. She carried the last boxes in herself. The legal finalization was a Thursday in February. Celeste had prepared her for it in the precise way she prepared for everything, practically, without sentiment, covering exactly what would happen in the order it would happen, so that there were no surprises, because surprises in rooms like that one cost more than the energy they saved. Amara drove herself. She wore the dark blazer and the simple jewelry, and she ate breakfast before she left, because she had learned, over the course of the preceding months, that she made better decisions when she was not managing hunger, alongside everything else, which was a small and obvious thing that she had somehow deprioritized for years. Courthouse was doing its ordinary Thursday business, the particular institutional hum of a building built to process the legal consequences of human decisions, staffed by people who had seen so many versions of the same stories that they had long since stopped reading the people carrying them and had learned to read only the documents. Celeste was waiting near the entrance. She looked as she always did, composed and purposeful and faintly impatient with environments that were not already organized to her satisfaction. "Hartwell's here," she said. Min-jae came. Amara had expected this. She nodded. 23 minutes, Celeste said. Start to finish. The judge is efficient. Good. They went in. The room was smaller than Amara had imagined from Celeste's description, not a dramatic courtroom but a procedural chamber, the kind where the architecture did not try to impress anyone. Chairs, tables, the judge's bench, the clerk at the side. Fluorescent lights that flattened everything into the same neutral brightness. Min-jae was already at his table. He wore charcoal. He sat with the specific-contained stillnesses of a man who had decided in advance how he was going to occupy this room, not the performed dominance of someone trying to control proceedings they couldn't control, but something more resigned and therefore more honest. He looked like a man attending a formality he had accepted. Amara sat at her table and did not look at him during the proceeding. She read each document as it was referenced. She signed when Celeste indicated. She answered the judge's questions in the clear, complete sentences she used, when the substance of her words mattered more than anything else about the way she delivered them. The judge was indeed efficient. 23 minutes. When it was done, Celeste collected the documents, and the clerk processed the filing, and the room began its ordinary reabsorption into the next case. Amara picked up her bag. Celeste touched her arm, the same brief gesture she had made once before. In this building, the most demonstrative thing in her repertoire. "That's it," Celeste said. They walked out. The hallway had the particular sound of institutional space, the murmur of adjacent proceedings, the roll of a cart, the distant chime of an elevator. Amara was near the exterior doors, already measuring the distance to the February light visible through the glass, when she heard footsteps behind her. Not hurrying, just certain. She stopped. She turned. Min-jae was alone. Hartwell was somewhere behind him. She could see him in the middle distance, deliberately not following, the professional wisdom of an attorney who understood that some final exchanges between clients were not his to participate in or prevent. Min-jae walked toward her. Not the walk she knew from 11 years, the forward-leaning authority of a man accustomed to rooms reorganizing around his arrival. This walk covered ground and nothing more. He stopped at a distance that was neither intimate nor formal. 3 feet, maybe 4. The distance of people who have known each other too long to pretend they are strangers, and no longer have the other thing. He looked at her. She had thought, in the weeks before this, about what it would feel like to stand in front of him with the divorce completed. She had thought it might feel like many things release, emptiness, residual anger, some form of grief for the years themselves, if not for the man. What she felt, standing there in the courthouse hallway, was something quieter and more final than any of those. She felt the particular clarity of someone who has done a difficult thing correctly, and now simply needs to let it be done. Was it worth it? He said. She had been half expecting this question. Not because she had rehearsed it, she hadn't. She had deliberately avoided mentally staging this moment because staged moments had a way of becoming the performance of themselves rather than the real thing. But because it was the question of a man who had framed the preceding months as a destruction rather than a consequence, and that framing was itself something she needed to address. I didn't destroy anything, she said. You built something on top of what we had, and it collapsed. What was underneath, what was real? When it was real, I don't think of that as destroyed. I think of it as over. He looked at the floor, just briefly. I know the difference matters to you, he said. It should matter to you too. He looked back up. His face was, she studied it with the clear eyes of someone who was seeing it, perhaps for the first time, without the overlay of what she had needed it to be. It was a face that had aged finely, that carried authority in its structure, that had kept its secrets well for a very long time. Right now it was simply a face, marked by what the last 4 months had cost him in ways that could not be entirely financial. You never once tried to go to the other side, he said. The other part of you could have. She knew what he meant. Criminal apparatus. The organization beneath the legitimate surface. She could have made contact with people who would have been interested in the forensic documentation she had assembled, or with people who were interested in different leverage entirely. People whose methods of addressing grievances were not Celeste Rowan and depositions and Milwaukee forensic accounting firms. That was never something I wanted, she said. I know. I'm saying he stopped. Reorganized. I'm saying I knew that about you and I used it. I knew you wouldn't go there, so the whole left side of my position was secure. You would fight me on paper. You would fight me with numbers. He paused. I thought that meant you were limited. The hallway hummed around them. And then you requested the deposition, he said. Yes. And I understood what was in those accounts. He held her eyes. What opening them fully would make available to other interested parties. Yes, that was the whole move, yes. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with the specific attention of a man who has spent his professional life reading the interior architecture of other people and is now encountering someone whose architecture he had fundamentally misread. I built my life on knowing what people would do, he said. What they wouldn't do, what they were capable of, and what they weren't. He stopped. I thought I knew you completely. You knew the version of me that 11 years of that marriage produced, she said. You didn't know what I was before it or what I would be after. He held that. Eli, she said. Not financially, you'll handle that. I know you will. Actually be there. Show him the difference between commanding something and caring for it. Something moved in his face. You said that on the phone. I'm saying it again because it matters more than anything else in this conversation. He looked at her for a long moment. Not with warmth, she was not looking for warmth from him and did not want what warmth might cost her to receive. With something starker. The recognition of someone who is seeing something accurately for the first time after seeing it wrong for years, and who is experiencing that recognition not as enlightenment, but as the plain fact of a correction. I underestimated you, he said, I know. From the beginning of this. The night you didn't walk through that door. She held very still. I saw your car in the parking structure the next morning, he said. The timing. I thought... He stopped. I thought you might know and had decided not to confront it. Thought that was the choice you'd made. The corridor around them went about its business. Nobody looked at them. They were just two people talking, which was what they were. I made a different choice, she said. Yes. He said it simply. Not with bitterness or admiration, just with the accurate simplicity of a man acknowledging a fact. You did. She adjusted the strap of her bag. Goodbye, Min-jae. He nodded, the single small motion of someone who has nothing left to argue. She pushed through the exterior doors and walked out into the February light, which was flat and white and entirely indifferent to the weight of what she had just walked away from, and she did not look back. Not because looking back was weakness, but because there was nothing behind her that required a second look. She had already seen everything clearly. That was the whole point. The drive from the courthouse to the townhouse took 41 minutes because she took the longer route, the one along the lakefront where the water was still, the flat pewter color of a Chicago February, the ice at the margins and the open dark water beyond it, the whole horizon doing the thing it did in winter when it suggested endlessness without providing comfort. She drove with the radio off. She thought about what came next, not in the large sense, not the shape of the remaining years, the question of who else she might become, but in the immediate practical sense. The compliance conversion template needed to be presented to the 3rd Division next week. She needed to call her landlord about the mail forwarding. She needed to buy a shower curtain because she had been using a temporary one for 6 weeks, and it was starting to annoy her. She had recently realized to call Deja. Deja had texted her 3 times during the proceedings, with messages of escalating warmth and righteous solidarity, each one slightly funnier than the last, and Amara had replied to all 3 with the brevity of someone managing capacity. And she owed Deja a real conversation, the kind with no agenda beyond the ordinary maintenance of a friendship that had survived 11 years of Amara being somewhat less available than Deja deserved. She took the lakefront all the way north before cutting inland. The townhouse, when she pulled up to it, looked the way it looked in winter, the maple trees bare, their structure visible against the pale sky, the clean, specific lines of them. She sat in the car for a moment. She sat down and looked at them the way she had been looking at them since she moved in, learning them, which was its own kind of trust. She went inside. The townhouse had absorbed, in the preceding weeks, the particular quality of a place that had been slept in and worked in and cooked in and been quietly unhappy in and quietly okay in, and occasionally, for brief moments, something approaching content in, which was the quality that distinguished a place where someone lived from a place someone occupied. She made tea. She stood at the kitchen window while the kettle heated and looked at the backyard, which was small and had a dormant garden bed that the previous owner had left in reasonable order and which she had not yet decided what to do with. She had been thinking about it. She did not have a history with gardens. She had spent her adult life in spaces managed by other people's decisions, and the idea of deciding what grew in a piece of ground was she kept returning to it, which she took as a sign that it mattered in some way she had not yet articulated. Maybe tomatoes. The thought arrived with no particular weight and made her very quietly, in the privacy of her own kitchen, almost smile. Kettle finished. She poured the tea. Celeste called that evening, not Marcus. Celeste herself, which meant the call was either personally motivated or carried information she had decided to deliver without intermediary. The counterfiling withdrawal process, Celeste said. Final record is clean. Your name is not associated with any financial irregularity in any public document. Amara sat in the armchair by the window. Thank you. I also wanted to tell you. Celeste paused, which was unusual enough that Amara paid close attention. I've been doing this for 19 years. Divorce law, asset division, high conflict proceedings. I've had clients who came in with more on paper and lost it through poor decisions. I've had clients with almost nothing who walked out with everything that mattered. Another pause. You came in with documentation and a forensic accounting firm and a request depositant to never once use the thing he was most afraid of. Amara waited. What he was most afraid of wasn't the numbers, Celeste said. It was you, specifically. He could have managed a less precise opponent. He couldn't manage someone who fought him on paper while he was trying to fight everything else. I had good counsel, Amara said. You did. You also knew what you wanted and what you wouldn't do to get it, and that combination is rarer than you'd think. Celeste's voice returned to its professional register. The marital home proceeds will clear escrow within 45 days. You'll see the confirmation from the title company. I know the timeline. Of course you do. And there was something in that not quite warmth, because Celeste did not deal in warmth as a professional instrument, but something adjacent to it. The recognition between two people who had been through a difficult thing together and come out the other side with their mutual respect intact. "Thank you," Amara said again. She meant it differently this time, and Celeste heard the difference. "Take care of yourself," Celeste said, and hung up. March came. Compliance conversion was presented to the 3rd Division on a Tuesday and received in the way that good work was received when the people receiving it were capable of recognizing good work seriously, with questions, and with the particular energy of a room that has realized a problem they had been managing is about to stop being a problem. Dr. Cole sat in on the presentation. She said nothing during it. Afterward, in the hallway, she stopped beside Amara and said, "The implementation documentation is the best I've seen on a project this size. I'd like to discuss your trajectory before the end of the quarter." "I have availability Thursday afternoon," Amara said. "I'll have Marcus, not yours." Dr. Cole almost smiled. "I'll have my assistant send you a calendar invite." Priya appeared at Amara's elbow 40 seconds after Dr. Cole walked away. "That was your trajectory conversation." It was a conversation about a trajectory conversation. "You're splitting hairs. I'm being precise." "You're always being precise." Priya fell into step beside her. "Come to lunch. I want to hear the word trajectory used in a sentence where it's about something good happening to you." They went to lunch. Amara ate the entire meal and talked more than she usually talked during lunches with colleagues and felt, sitting in the ordinary noise of a restaurant at noon on a Tuesday, the specific quality of a life returning to its own dimensions. Not expanding dramatically. Not transforming into something unrecognizable. Just filling back out. The way a room fills out when the furniture is arranged to fit the actual space, which rather than someone else's floor plan. The Thursday meeting with Dr. Cole lasted 40 minutes. When Amara walked out of it, she was Director of Financial Compliance, officially and formally, with the title change effective the 1st of April, and the corresponding adjustment to her compensation and her organizational authority, and in a way she would not have known how to value 2 years ago, her name on decisions that mattered. She sat in her car in the parking structure, a different parking structure than the one outside the maternity hospital. Nothing like it. Just a parking structure, and thought about the version of herself who had spent years declining promotions because evenings were consumed by Min-jae's administrative corrections. A sound like Green, whose skills had been functioning in the background of someone else's enterprise, who had learned to make herself useful in ways that did not require credit. She thought about what Celeste had said. You knew what you wanted and what you wouldn't do to get it. She thought about room 114 and the blue gift bag and the choice in the parking lot structure that November night to reach for precision instead of fury. Every subsequent choice had descended from that one. The spreadsheet, the legal pad, the deposition request. The line she had never crossed into the other side of Min-jae's world. The 3 conditions she had given Naomi, all of it rooted in a single decision made in a car while her husband was upstairs kissing her sister's forehead. She started the car and drove home. Loretta called on a Saturday in late March and asked her to come by. Not for a reason, not framed around Naomi or Eli or any of the ongoing structural adjustments of what their family was becoming. Just come by Saturday, I'm making food. Amara went. A sound like the kitchen smelled the way it had always smelled, which was one of the things about her mother's house that had remained absolutely unchanged through everything the particular domestic history of decades of cooking. Layered into the walls and the ceiling and the specific angle of the afternoon light through the window over the sink. They ate at the small kitchen table. The first part of the meal was ordinary. Loretta talked about the neighbor's renovation and a friend from her book club who had moved to Arizona and the early emergence of something in her garden that she was cautiously hopeful about. Amara listened and contributed and ate. The ordinary maintenance of closeness between two people who had been through something and were on the other side of it and were choosing to resume the ordinary. Then Loretta set her fork down. She told me, Loretta said. Naomi. She told me what she had told me about you. About the marriage. That she had let me believe you already knew. That she had framed it in a way that made you sound like you had made space for it. She looked at her hands, then back up. She called me 3 weeks ago. She said she needed to say it. I don't know what made her decide to, but she called, and she said it clearly. That she had lied to me about what you knew. Amara looked at her mother's face. I sat with that for a while before I called you, Loretta said, because I wanted to understand what I had done with what she'd told me, what I had gone to your step prepared to accomplish. She pressed her lips together. I came to your house with food, and I talked about the baby, and I applied pressure that I believed was reasonable because I thought I had the full picture. I didn't have the full picture. You didn't, Amara said. I should have asked you. Yes. I made your betrayal easier to manage for the people who had committed it. Loretta's voice was steady, but costing her something to keep steady. By coming to you the way I did. By saying what I said about Eli. I was a tool they used, and I didn't know it, and I'm sorry. The kitchen was very quiet. Amara looked at her mother for a long moment. She had known her entire life. At the face, she had known her entire life. The particular weight of a person who has understood something about themselves that they would have preferred not to understand. There was no performance in it, no strategy, just a 62-year-old woman sitting with the accurate knowledge of how she had been used and what that use had cost. They were smart about it, Amara said finally. The way they designed it. It required your participation without requiring your knowledge. That's how leverage works, when the person doing the leveraging understands people. They knew you loved both of us. They knew you would instinctively try to find a solution. They built around what you would naturally do. That doesn't excuse. I'm not excusing it, I'm explaining it. She paused. I'm also telling you that I know the difference between being deceived and choosing to deceive. You were deceived. That's a different thing. Loretta's eyes were wet, but she was not going to cry. She had the compressed dignity of a woman who had cried in private and was not going to repeat it here. Are we all right? She said. Amara thought about the question carefully. Green wood splitting. Not the way you thought about an answer you were composing, but the way you thought about something you needed to assess honestly, before you reported on it. Yes, she said. Not in the way we were before all of this. In the way we are now, which is different. I think it might be better, eventually. Because we both know things we didn't know before, about how things actually work between us. She picked up her fork. That's worth something. Loretta reached across the table and put her hand over Amara's hand. She held it there. Neither of them said anything. The afternoon light moved through the kitchen window the way it always had, falling at the same angle it had fallen for 40 years of meals eaten at this table, and it was enough. In April, Naomi sent a photograph. Eli in the cream and blue blanket, his face doing something complicated with its expression, the ambiguous facial mobility of a young baby not yet settled into its permanent register. The blanket had been washed enough times that the fabric had softened, and the stitching showed the subtle loosening of something that had been held and used. No caption, just the photograph. Amara looked at it for a long time, standing at the kitchen window of her townhouse in the new green light that was coming through the maple trees, which had budded in the third week of March and were now in the first full leaf of April. Pale translucent green of early season that would deepen and consolidate as summer came. She typed, "He's beautiful." Dots. Naomi wrote, "I know I don't know where to start." Amara looked at the maple trees. She thought about starting. About how starting was not the same as forgiving, and was not the same as forgetting, and was not the same as erasing the $18,740, or the canceled loan, or the hospital corridor, or the specific and calculated cruelty of a plan that had used her love for her family as the mechanism of her own dispossession. Starting was not any of those things. Starting was simply the decision that the future was going to contain this person, this sister, in some form, and that the form it took would be determined by what both of them chose to be, now not by what they had been, not by what had been done, but by what they chose going forward, daily, in the specific and unglamorous way that all real choices were made. She typed, "Tell the truth. Never ask me for money. Never use Eli." She sent it. Then she added, "Those are the conditions. If you can hold them, I'm here." The dots took a long time. Then, all three. I can hold them. Then, after a pause, I'm going to need time to figure out how to be your sister again. I think I need to learn how from scratch. Amara read that twice. She typed back, so do I. We're even. She put her phone in her pocket and stood at the window and looked at the maple trees and felt the particular quality of something that was not resolved, not clean, not completed, not the warm closure of a wound that had fully healed but was alive. Moving, pointed in a direction she could with accuracy, call forward. The summer came incrementally, the way summers came in Chicago, the heat building in layers, the lake doing its moderating work, the city expanding into its warm weather self, with the particular energy, a place that had been compressed by cold for 5 months and was now released. Amara bought a table for the backyard. Nothing elaborate cedar from a hardware store, the kind you assembled yourself, with a provided hex wrench over the course of an afternoon and a half. She assembled it on a Saturday badly at first, and then correctly after she found the instruction page she had initially set aside. And when it was done, she sat at it in the backyard with a glass of water and looked at the dormant garden bed she had spent 3 months deciding about. She had ordered seeds the previous week, tomatoes, 2 varieties of cherry and a larger slicing type, whose name she had to look up twice because she kept forgetting it. Also basil, because she had learned in the looking up process that tomatoes and basil grew well together, which she had not known, and which seemed, in a way she could not have easily explained, like useful information. She had never grown anything before. She set the seeds in the ground that afternoon, following the instructions with the same precision she brought to documentation depth, spacing, water. She was not confident about the outcome. The person at the garden center said the timing was right and the soil seemed decent and there was enough sun exposure from the east to give them a reasonable chance. She watered them. Then she sat back at the cedar table and looked at the patch of ground where she had done the work and thought, now I wait and see what grows. The divorce finalization had been a Thursday. The summer was all Saturdays, or felt that way, in the specific retrospective blur of a season that had been lived at a pace that was, for the first time in memory, calibrated to her own. She called Dija. Not once but regularly, the resumption of a rhythm that had been attenuated during the marriage and the preceding and the months of maximal capacity consumption. Specific toll that long sustained difficulty took on the relationships that didn't require immediate maintenance because they were strong enough to survive neglect. Which was itself a way of saying she had taken Dija for granted in the specific way you took for granted the things that held. Dija answered the first call with, there she is. No accusation, just recognition, the warmth of someone who had been waiting without making it a burden. They talked for 2 hours, about everything, and then about specifics, and then about the ordinary daily contents of 2 lives that had been parallel for 20 years and had now resumed their contact. Amara told Dija more than she had told anyone during the proceedings, not the legal strategy, not the forensic details, but the felt experience of it. The parking structure, the legal pad at the kitchen table, the guest room that had become her room, packing the house with nobody helping. Dija listened without interrupting, which was not something Dija was naturally inclined toward, which meant she was doing it deliberately. And Amara felt the specific quality of being listened to by someone who understood the whole person, and not just the current crisis. When she finished, Dija said, I just want to say one thing. Okay, I'm sorry I wasn't more. You offered. I was managing capacity. I know, I'm still sorry. Don't be. You're here now. I'm always here. That's what I'm trying to tell you. A pause. Also, I need you to send me a picture of this townhouse, because I have been imagining it, and I need to know if I'm right. Amara sent the picture. Dija responded with 3 texts in rapid succession. Okay, it's more modest than I pictured. The trees are excellent. That table in the backyard is very you. She put her phone down and looked at the trees and thought, it is very me. That was the point. On a Friday evening in late June, Amara sat on the front steps with a glass of iced tea and watched the maple trees in the last long light of the day. The street was doing its early summer business. The particular expansion of outdoor life that happened when the weather made staying inside a choice rather than a necessity. Kids somewhere on the next block. The smell of something grilling 2 houses down. A dog walking its person past the townhouse. both of them at different speeds for different reasons. She had left her phone inside deliberately. She was not managing anything. She was not reviewing anything. She was not building a case or organizing a column or calibrating a response or structuring an approach. She was sitting on her own front steps with iced tea, watching light move through leaves that had been bare when she arrived, and were now full summer green, abundant and uncomplicated, doing the thing they were built to do. The tomatoes were coming in. She had checked that morning. Small green orbs on the cherry plant dense, promising, not yet ready. The slicing variety was behind by a week, maybe 2. She had looked them up again, the variety name, and had forgotten it again by the afternoon, which she had decided was fine. She didn't need to remember the name. She needed to water them, which she was doing. She thought sitting on the steps about Min-jae, not the man in the courthouse hallway, not the man through the hospital room window, the man she had known at the beginning, a sound before Smita. For the beginning of the 11 years, the man she had chosen with the openness of someone who knew exactly what she was choosing and had decided that the complicated thing was worth the complication. Because the person inside it was worth the person. She thought some of that was real. It would be easier, probably, to decide it had all been performance from the first moment. But she had been 35 years old when she stood outside, room 114, and she was 35 now, the same person with the same capacity for accuracy, and accuracy required her to acknowledge that some of it had been real. It had simply not been enough. And the parts of her that had been reduced, the promotions declined, the evenings consumed, the skills deployed invisibly, the version of herself edited down to fit alongside someone else's priorities, those had been real too. Real costs, paid in real time, at the price of a version of herself she was only now excavating. She breathed in, she breathed out. The light moved through the maple trees in the long, specific way of a June evening in a northern city, taking its time, as though understanding that the long days were numbered and worth extending. She was not finished becoming what she was becoming. She understood that. The townhouse was not a destination. The directorship was not an ending. The 3 conditions she had given Naomi were the beginning of something that would take years to build or fail to build, and she could not control which. The relationship with her mother was a living thing, evolving, sometimes uncomfortable, fundamentally intact. All of it, the whole accumulated architecture of a life after, was in the process of being built. Not designed in advance. Built the way real things were built, day by day, decision by decision, with mistakes included and no guarantee of outcome. She had been here before, she understood. Not here, not this specific step, this specific light, but this position, at the beginning of something she had chosen. The same position she had been in 35 years ago when she had not yet learned that she was someone who would choose precision over panic, deliberation over destruction, the difficult, clean path over the expedient one that cost more in the end. She had always been that person. The preceding years had taught her to perform a smaller version. Now she was done performing. A text arrived from inside the house. She could hear the sound of it through the open window, the faint chime of an incoming message. She did not get up to check it. Whatever it was, it could wait until she was ready. She finished her iced tea.
She looked at the maple trees for another minute.
She thought up the woman who had stood outside, room 114 with a blue gift bag and 11 years of good faith, and had heard everything she was never supposed to hear, and had walked back to her car in silence, and chosen, in the dark of a parking structure, to be precise. She thought, that woman did not know what came next. She thought, neither do I. She thought, that's the same. She stood. She picked up her empty glass. She went inside, into the particular quiet of her own house, where the lights were on, because she had decided she liked coming back to light, and where the mail on the counter was her mail, and where her paycheck arrived each month into her account, and her name was on every document, and her choices were her choices, and her kindness, which had not gone, had never gone, had simply been living, temporarily, behind the wrong door, was available again, on her own terms, in her own time, to the people who deserved it, and the work that earned it, and the ordinary daily life she had rebuilt. one deliberate decision at a time, from a parking structure in November into a front step in June. She washed her glass, she dried it, she put it away. Outside, the maple trees held the last of the light as long as they could. And then evening came, the way evening always came, without drama, without ceremony, simply the world continuing its ordinary work, and Amara Caldwell stood in the kitchen of her own home and was, in every way that mattered, exactly where she had chosen to be.